It was a Friday night in Brooklyn, the kind of night when the city seemed to hum softly beneath a blanket of cold wind. Inside the velvet note, the air shimmered with the slow rhythm of live jazz. A saxophone cried low in the corner, and warm amber lights flickered over half-empty glasses. Daniel Whitmore sat alone at the far end of the bar, his posture quiet, and measured a man who looked like he had stopped belonging anywhere. His hand circled the rim of a glass he never touched. The ice inside had already melted. The waiters whispered to one another. That's him, the tech guy who never talks, the one who built something out of nothing and now can't look anyone in the eye. Daniel didn't come here for company. He came because this was the place he had once danced with his wife. 3 years to the day since that night. 3 years since the crash. His reflection in the glass behind the bar was a stranger. The man he used to be had vanished somewhere between the headlines and the silence. Across the room, Ava Thompson moved between tables with quiet focus. Her uniform was simple black, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, a silver earring glinting when she turned her head. She was a part-time waitress, a part-time dance student, and someone who still believed that kindness could change a person. She didn't notice him at first, not until she looked up and saw a man staring at the stage as if trying to remember how to breathe. Something about the loneliness in his posture drew her in like music without words. She hesitated, tray still in her hand, then placed it down, wiping her palms against her skirt. Maybe it was the song playing something slow and old, a rhythm meant for two people who had forgotten how to move together. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just that Ava had always been brave in small ways that mattered. She took a breath and walked toward him. He didn't look up until her shadow fell across his table. His eyes, gray and distant, focused on her face, as if waking from a long dream. For a second, she almost turned back, but then she smiled soft and uncertain and asked, "Would you like to dance?" The question hung in the air like a challenge and a prayer. Conversations dimmed around them. The saxophone slowed. Daniel blinked, as though unsure he had heard correctly. "I haven't danced in years," he said, his voice low and rough. "Then let's change that," she whispered. It wasn't a flirtation. It was an offering, something small and human. Slowly he rose. Every movement seemed reluctant, mechanical, as though his body had forgotten the language of rhythm. But when she reached out her hand, he took it. The crowd made space without a word. Under the golden light, they began to move hesitant at first, then with an unexpected grace. Ava guided him gently. Her steps fluid, his steps, heavy but sincere. He followed the music, as if it were memory itself, leading him somewhere safer. For the briefest moment, she saw his eyes soften. The man who had walked into the bar like a ghost began to look alive again. Their shadows swayed on the wooden floor, two strangers caught in a moment that felt like forgiveness. When the music faded, neither of them spoke. Daniel's chest rose and fell, as though he had been holding his breath for years. He looked down at her hand, still resting lightly in his, then let go, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "Thank you," he murmured. His voice trembled, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper relief. He turned before she could answer, walking toward the door without looking back. Ava stood in the middle of the room, aware that everyone had gone back to talking, but that something inside her had shifted. On his table, she noticed a folded bill and a business card, $200, and beneath it his name printed in clean silver letters. Daniel Whitmore. She didn't recognize it yet. Not the weight it carried in the world outside this bar, but she felt something else. Instead, a pulse of curiosity, a faint ache of empathy for a man whose sadness had filled the entire room. As she tucked the card into her pocket, the door closed behind him, and the wind from outside swept through the bar. The saxophone began again. The bartender looked at her and said softly, "Guess he found his song for the night." Ava smiled faintly, but her eyes lingered on the door. She didn't know it yet, but that one quiet question, "Would you like to dance?" had just changed both their lives. The morning light spilled over Brooklyn like pale silk, soft and cold. Ava woke before dawn, stretching her sore arms from the long shift the night before. The velvet note still lingered in her mind, the slow jazz, the golden light, and the stranger who had danced with her as if the world had ended and begun again in a single breath. She didn't know his name meant anything. To her, Daniel Whitmore was just a quiet man who needed a song. She made instant coffee in a chipped mug, slipped into a wool coat, and biked toward the community center on Franklin Avenue, where she taught dance to kids every Saturday. The air smelled of rain and iron. Inside the gym, the children waited barefoot, their laughter echoing off the walls. For 90 minutes, Ava forgot everything. She showed them how to move, how to trust the floor, how to let music lead instead of fear. One little boy named Jonah, who wore braces on his legs, asked Miss Ava, "Do you think people like me can really dance?" She smiled. "Everyone can. We just have to find the rhythm that belongs to us." Across the city, Daniel woke in a different kind of silence. His penthouse in Manhattan was immaculate, sterile glass marble steel. The only color came from framed photographs, his late wife Elise laughing under a summer sun. A photo from their wedding, her veil caught midair by wind. He hadn't taken them down. Maybe because taking them down would mean admitting she was never coming back. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The city looked small from up here, toy-like. He hated it, the distance, the view, the illusion of control. His reflections stared back at him, a man who had everything except the one thing that mattered. He had spent 3 years pretending that work could fill the space Elise had left. He built, acquired, expanded, made headlines. None of it brought her back. That morning, his assistant reminded him, "You have a board meeting at 9 and the Whitmore Foundation review at 11. He nodded mechanically. The foundation had been Elise's idea, a charity supporting art programs for underprivileged kids. He had promised to continue it after she died, but hadn't been to a meeting in months. "Tell them I'll attend today," he said suddenly. His assistant blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir." By noon, Ava arrived at Whitmore Foundation's modest downtown office for her internship interview. She wore her cleanest white blouse and borrowed heels a size too big. She wasn't nervous until she stepped into the glass lobby and saw the company name on the wall, Whitmore Foundation for the Arts. She whispered the name under her breath, without realizing it was the same one printed on the card from last night. She was ushered into a small conference room where 3 panelists waited, including an older woman named Marjorie, the program director. "Miss Thompson," Marjorie said warmly, "your proposal about teaching dance to disabled children caught our attention. It's rare to see something both realistic and poetic." Ava smiled shyly. "Thank you. I just believe art shouldn't belong to privilege. It belongs to anyone who has a heartbeat." The panel exchanged glances of approval. Then the door opened. Daniel stepped in. The air shifted. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, the kind of man who carried silence like armor. Ava froze. For a second, she thought she was imagining things. Daniel's eyes met hers. Recognition flickered there, quick, subtle, hidden behind professional composure. He nodded politely to the panel. "I'm sorry for being late. Please continue." Marjorie gestured toward him. "Mr. Whitmore oversees final approvals for new programs. He's joining us today." Ava's heart stumbled. She tried to focus on her presentation, but every time she glanced up, Daniel's gaze anchored her. He said nothing, just listened. When she described her idea for using movement therapy to help children regain confidence, he leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and asked softly, "And why dance?" Ava hesitated, then answered, "Because dance is the only place I've ever felt seen. It reminds people they're still alive, even when they've forgotten." For a long second, Danielle didn't speak. Then he nodded once quietly. "Thank you," he said. After the interview, Ava stepped outside, exhaling hard, her pulse still racing. The city felt enormous again. She laughed at herself. What were the chances that the same man from the bar turned out to be the head of one of the biggest tech companies in the country? She shook her head. Maybe it was just a coincidence of names. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his office, the city glowing beneath him. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. It reminds people they're still alive. He remembered the warmth of her hand, the gentleness of her voice. It had been 3 years since anyone had touched him without wanting something in return. His assistant entered. "Sir, about the foundation grants, should we postpone decisions until next week?" Daniel shook his head. "No, fund the Franklin Avenue program, the one led by Ava Thompson." The assistant nodded. "Understood. Should I notify her?" "Not yet," Danielle said. "I'll visit the site myself." That night, Ava sat in her small apartment, eating leftover soup with her roommate Jenna, who was scrolling through social media. "You look distracted," Jenna teased. "Met someone?" Ava laughed softly. "If I did, he's completely out of my league." Jenna grinned. "You impossible." But Ava only smiled faintly, remembering the way Daniel's hand had trembled when he took hers. The next day she returned to her usual rhythm class in the morning, the bar at night. During her shift, a customer left an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a single line, typed neatly, "Congratulations. Welcome to the Whitmore Foundation Internship Program." Ava gasped. She looked around, but no one seemed to know who delivered it. Only the faintest trace of cologne lingered on the paper, the same she had smelled that night on the dance floor. Somewhere across the river, Daniel sat in his car parked outside the community center. Through the frosted windows, he watched Ava teach a group of children. Their laughter cut through the cold air like sunlight. He saw her kneel beside the boy, with braces clapping along to the rhythm he created with small wooden sticks. Something in Daniel's chest loosened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an observer of life, but a participant, invisible yet present. Inside, Ava caught sight of a car parked near the curb, headlights dimmed. A silhouette sat still behind the glass. When she looked again, it was gone. She told herself it was nothing, but deep down, she felt that strange certainty, the feeling that her life had quietly begun to change. That night, she opened her worn notebook and wrote a single line. "Sometimes the people who need saving are the ones who never ask." She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe because when she had asked that stranger to dance, she wasn't just saving him. She might have been saving herself too. The first week of Ava's internship at the Whitmore Foundation felt like stepping into another universe. Gone were the dim lights of the velvet note and the smell of spilled whiskey. Here, everything gleamed. The glass-walled office in Midtown Manhattan hummed with quiet energy. People spoke in low professional tones, their footsteps muffled on the carpet. Ava felt both invisible and seen a small figure moving through a world that didn't quite belong to her. She spent her mornings filing reports and reading proposals, her afternoons shadowing the outreach coordinator who managed art programs around the city. She loved it, even the smallest tasks, because every time she saw the words Whitmore Foundation printed on a document, she remembered that maybe, just maybe, her dream was no longer impossible. She didn't see Daniel for days, but sometimes when she passed the executive floor, she felt a strange awareness, as though someone behind tinted glass was watching quietly. On Friday, she was asked to deliver a stack of reports to the top floor. She hesitated in front of the elevator mirror, fixing her hair, telling herself not to look nervous. The doors opened to silence. The carpet here was thicker, the lighting warmer. She followed the hallway to the end and found Daniel's office door slightly open. She knocked gently. "Come in," his voice said low and even. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, the skyline behind him, painted gold by the setting sun. For a moment, Ava forgot to breathe. He turned and his expression softened. "Miss Thompson," he said with polite formality. "Congratulations on joining the foundation." She placed the papers on his desk, her pulse quickening. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I didn't expect you'd remember me." "I remember everyone who changes the music in the room," he said quietly. There was a pause, warm, awkward, charged. "You seem to be adapting well." "I'm trying," she said, smiling faintly. "It's different here. Everyone speaks in acronyms." He chuckled softly. The sound startled even him. "That's true." His laughter faded, replaced by a thoughtful silence. "I read your project proposal, the one about adaptive dance for children with disabilities. It's beautiful." "Thank you," she whispered. "It's something I believe in." "Belief," he said, glancing out the window, "is the only thing that makes art survive money." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she liked the way he said it, like a confession. When she left the office, her heart was still beating too fast. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. Daniel would stop by her department under the pretext of checking progress. Ava would bring updates in person instead of sending emails. Their conversations were short, but every one of them left behind a quiet electricity. One afternoon, during a site visit to the Franklin Avenue Community Center, Ava twisted her ankle while helping a child down from a stage platform. She winced but brushed it off. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her foot throbbed. The staff suggested she sit out, but she refused until Daniel appeared unexpectedly at the doorway. He had come unannounced, wearing a dark coat, his usual entourage absent. "You don't look fine," he said, walking closer. Ava blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Checking on our programs," he said, kneeling before she could stop him. Or maybe something else. His hands were steady as he wrapped a bandage around her ankle from the first aid kit. His fingers brushed her skin, lightly, almost reverently. She stared at him, the billionaire, who looked so out of place among chipped walls and squeaky floors, and felt something shift in the air. "You don't have to help," she murmured. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I need to." Neither of them spoke for a long time. Outside, snow began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. The children's laughter filled the hall, and for a moment, Daniel closed his eyes, as if absorbing the sound. It had been years since laughter hadn't hurt. After that day, Daniel began visiting more often. He would arrive quietly, standing near the back of the dance room, watching Ava guide her students with patience and light. She never made the children feel broken. She made them feel capable. Once he saw her take Jonah's hands, helping him balance, whispering, "Don't listen to fear. Listen to the drum." The boy grinned, stumbling but trying again. Daniel watched her and thought of Elise, of how she had once believed art could save the world. Ava didn't remind him of Elise. She reminded him that he could still believe in the same things Elise had. In the evenings, he found himself working later, just to keep his mind busy. But every time he tried to focus, the image of Ava's face, earnest, alive, full of motion, broke through the stillness. For Ava, Daniel became both mystery and comfort. He never flirted, never crossed boundaries, but there was something magnetic about the way he looked at her, as if he saw the parts of her no one else bothered to notice. One evening, she stayed late at the foundation to finish paperwork. When the lights flickered off automatically, she nearly jumped, only to see Daniel standing by the elevator. "You should go home," he said softly. "I was just finishing this report," she replied. He tilted his head. "Perfection is overrated. Easy for you to say." She teased before realizing she'd said it aloud. He smiled a real smile, this time small but unmistakable. "Maybe, but so is loneliness." The elevator doors opened behind him, but neither moved. It was one of those silences that felt heavy and light at once. When he finally stepped in, he turned and said, "Good night, Ava." It was the first time he used her name. After that, something unspoken grew between them. She began to sense his presence before he entered a room. He began to find excuses to linger, to ask questions about her students, to watch her explain how music could change the brain. Theirs was not a loud connection. It was built on shared silences and small kindnesses. One day during a foundation charity gala, Ava volunteered to help backstage. She was adjusting a microphone when Daniel walked by in a tailored tuxedo. For a second, she didn't recognize him, the polished billionaire version of the man she had come to know. Their eyes met across the corridor. He looked at her as though she was the only thing in focus. Later, when the event ended, he found her outside near the catering trucks. "I wanted to thank you," he said. For what, she asked. "For reminding me that people don't just move for applause. They move to feel alive." She laughed softly. "You're starting to sound like an artist." "Don't tell anyone," he murmured. Snow began to drift again, that night, catching in her hair. Daniel looked at her, wanting to say something more, but instead, he just offered his hand to steady her on the icy sidewalk. Their fingers brushed, lingered. Neither of them pulled away right away. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their worlds changed. Daniel's visits to the center became routine, but the staff had grown used to it. Ava never questioned his reasons anymore. Sometimes they shared coffee in the cold courtyard, speaking of nothing which was somehow everything. Then one evening, as the children left, Jonah handed Daniel a handmade card that read, "Thank you for helping us dance." Daniel knelt beside the boy voice, barely above a whisper. "I should be thanking you." When he looked up, Ava was watching him. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them that words couldn't name, something fragile, something beginning. That night, when Ava returned home, she replayed every glance, every pause, every heartbeat that had filled the spaces between their words. She knew it was dangerous to feel anything for a man like him, but emotion didn't ask for permission. It simply existed. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Kindness is a rhythm too. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it." She didn't know Daniel, not really, but she was beginning to see the man behind the myth, and he in turn was starting to remember what it meant to be alive. The city glittered with December light, but Daniel saw none of it. The Whitmore Tower was preparing for the annual shareholder gala, a spectacle of wealth that he despised yet could never avoid. His team arranged everything: press coverage, speeches, a charity announcement that made the company appear humane. To the world, Daniel Whitmore was the genius who rebuilt America's tech landscape, the visionary who turned grief into gold. To himself, he was a man wearing a suit made of ghosts. He stared at his reflection while his tailor pinned the lapels of his jacket. "Perfect as always, sir," the man said. Daniel gave a polite nod, but his mind was elsewhere at the community center, where a small woman with dark eyes was teaching children to dance. Her voice, her laughter, her courage, those were the only things that felt real lately. But reality had boundaries. He could never let those two worlds touch. He had built too much to lose. Ava, meanwhile, had been thriving at the foundation. Her program proposal for adaptive dance was selected for full funding, and she worked tirelessly to expand it. Everyone admired her optimism. She brought life into a place that had long forgotten what art meant, yet she sensed something shifting, a kind of tension that hummed whenever Daniel entered a room. She avoided looking at him too long. She was grateful to him, but wary of the strange connection that neither of them dared to name. That Sunday night, as she was locking up the dance hall, the janitor left the radio on. The news anchor's voice cut through the music. "Whitmore Innovations announces new AI expansion. CEO Daniel Whitmore plans to double his company's valuation in the next quarter. Sources say his latest project could reshape the future of automation." Ava froze. She looked at the small business card she had kept tucked in her notebook since that night at the Velvet Note. Daniel Whitmore. The letters felt heavier now, like iron pressed against her skin. She turned off the radio, heart pounding. He wasn't just a wealthy man. He was one of the most powerful figures in the country. She sat down, realization washing over her. The man who had bandaged her ankle, who spoke softly about dance and humanity, was also the face on magazine covers, the untouchable billionaire the media called the machine. The next morning, she went to the foundation, early, hoping to clear her thoughts. Daniel was already there, standing by the coffee machine, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired but human. When he saw her, his expression changed, softening, as it always did. "You're here early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. He handed her a cup. "Neither could I." There was a silence between them that used to be comfortable, but now felt fragile. "I saw the news," she finally said. His hand stilled on the cup. "Of course you did. You never told me who you are," she said quietly. "Was I supposed to?" "Maybe not," she admitted, "but it feels like I've been talking to a stranger who was pretending to be someone else." Daniel set the cup down slowly. "I wasn't pretending, Ava. When I'm here, when I'm with you, I'm the most honest version of myself I've been in years." She looked away. "That's easy to say when your name can buy silence." He flinched. "That's not fair. Neither is finding out the truth through a headline." The conversation burned in the cold morning air. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "You think the money means I don't bleed like everyone else?" "I think you hide behind it," she said. "And maybe you've been hiding so long you forgot what it's like to be seen." Her words struck him like a memory. He remembered Elise saying almost the same thing years ago. "You build machines to protect yourself," she had once told him, "but nothing you build can keep the world out." Daniel turned toward the window, the skyline gleaming like armor. "I didn't tell you because I wanted one part of my life to be untouched by all this. You made me feel human again, Ava. I was afraid that if you knew you'd stop looking at me that way. And how do I look at you? Like I'm not broken." Silence settled. Then she whispered, "Maybe we both are." He turned, and for the first time, she saw him without the mask, the exhaustion in his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the quiet plea he didn't voice. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Car accident. We were supposed to attend a charity ball that night. I was on a call, and she left without me. The driver lost control. I built this company in her memory, or at least that's what I told myself. But the truth is, I built it so I wouldn't have to feel." Ava's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Daniel continued, voice breaking for the first time. "You asked me to dance that night because you saw something in me worth saving. I don't know if you still do, now that you know everything." She swallowed hard. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know pain when I see it. And I know you're still holding yours like a trophy." His mouth lifted in a bitter smile. "Maybe I don't deserve to let it go." "No one does," she said softly, "until they choose to." She left his office before he could answer. The rest of the day passed like static. Daniel canceled his meetings, staring at the empty chair across from his desk. He thought about calling her but didn't. Pride was easier than vulnerability. That evening, Ava went to the community center, hoping the rhythm of the children's laughter would ground her. Jonah ran to her, waving his new braces, excited to show her he could take 3 steps alone. She clapped, her heart softening. For a moment, she forgot everything. When she looked toward the doorway, she saw a tall figure standing there, Daniel watching silently. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. He just watched her teach, his face unreadable. When the class ended, he slipped away before she could approach. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the soft glow of city lights. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. The glass reflected his face, and the skyline behind him, a man trapped between glass and guilt. He thought of Ava's words, "Maybe you forgot what it's like to be seen." He opened the safe in his office and took out an old photograph of Elise on their wedding day, barefoot, laughing as he lifted her off the ground. The joy in her eyes hurt more than any wound. He placed the photo beside a crumpled piece of paper, a flyer for the Franklin Avenue dance program with Ava's name printed at the bottom. 2 women both teaching him how to live. One through love lost, one through love found. Down in Brooklyn, Ava sat by her window, staring at the city skyline in the distance. She didn't hate him. She wasn't even angry anymore. She just felt the weight of 2 worlds that could never truly meet. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the business card she had kept all this time. Daniel Whitmore. She turned it over and wrote on the back, "Sometimes truth hurts less than silence." She didn't send it. She just placed it beside her notebook and went to bed. The next morning, snow began to fall again, soft and endless. Daniel woke before sunrise, unable to shake the feeling that if he didn't do something, he would lose the one person who had made him feel alive again. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then put it down. Instead, he grabbed his coat and left the penthouse. The elevator opened to the lobby where reporters waited for a statement about his new project. Cameras flashed. "Mr. Whitmore, can we get a comment on the AI expansion?" He ignored them and walked past, disappearing into the cold. The driver asked, "Where to, sir?" Daniel hesitated, then said quietly, "Brooklyn." As the car moved through the waking city, he realized he didn't know what he would say when he saw her. He just knew he needed to see her, to tell her that for once, the man she had met in that bar, not the billionaire, not the machine, was the real one. But when he arrived at the community center, the lights were off. The sign on the door said closed for winter maintenance. He stood there for a long time, snow falling softly onto his shoulders. For the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore felt powerless in a way no fortune could fix. Somewhere across the city, Ava danced alone in an empty studio, her reflection blurred by tears. She didn't know why her chest ached so much when she thought of him. Maybe it was because she saw the truth he couldn't yet face. The music played softly through her headphones. She moved anyway, not to forget him, but to remember what he had taught her, that even broken things can move with grace. Winter crept over New York like a quiet ache, wrapping the city in muted gray. Weeks passed since Ava had last seen Daniel. The foundation continued its programs, though whispers followed her in the halls about the CEO's sudden visits to her classes, about favoritism and gossip that made her skin burn. She focused on her students, burying herself in work, yet the emptiness inside her grew louder. She told herself that what had happened between them was just a misunderstanding between two people who lived in different worlds. But every night, she caught herself staring at the phone, wondering if he would ever call. Daniel, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. Reports speculated about his health, his absence from meetings, the company's direction. None of that mattered to him. He spent his mornings walking through Central Park in the snow, trying to understand the silence he had built around himself. Each crunch of ice beneath his shoes sounded like regret. He had told himself that distance was mercy, that keeping Ava away would protect her from the shadow of his world. But mercy, he discovered, could also be cruelty. One morning, while sorting papers in her small office, Ava received a notice from the Foundation's finance department. Funding for her Franklin Avenue program was delayed due to budget restructuring. She frowned, rereading the letter. The program relied on that money to keep the community center open through winter. Without it, the kids would lose their space. She marched to the elevator and rode up to the executive floor, ignoring the nervous looks from assistants. Daniel's secretary tried to stop her. "Mr. Whitmore isn't available." "Then he should make himself available." Ava said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. She opened his office door and froze. He was there, standing by the window, as always, though thinner, now paler, his eyes shadowed. He turned slowly. "Ava," he said softly, as if her name were both a wound and a wish. "Why is my program being cut?" she asked, holding up the letter. "It's not being cut," he said. "It's being reviewed." "Reviewed means forgotten," she snapped. "You promised those kids a future." He stepped closer. "I didn't promise. I tried. Tried isn't enough for them," she said, voice breaking. "You can disappear when things hurt, but they can't. They wait in the cold for doors that may never open." Daniel inhaled sharply, the truth hitting harder than anger. "You're right," he admitted. "I've been hiding again." He looked tired, but beneath that exhaustion flickered something alive. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "I want to show you something." They drove in silence to the community center. Snow drifted across the parking lot. When they entered, the place was empty, except for a few kids sitting quietly near the mirrors. The heat had been turned off. Ava's heart clenched. Daniel looked around, his jaw tightening. "You kept it open anyway." "I couldn't let them lose hope," she said. "You taught me that." He watched as she gathered the children into a circle. "All right," she said, clapping her hands. "We'll dance to stay warm." She turned on a small speaker, the soft beat of a piano melody filling the cold air. The children began to move hesitantly, their breaths forming clouds. Jonah stumbled, his braces clinking, but Ava caught his hands. "Follow the rhythm, not the pain," she whispered. Daniel stood at the doorway, something in him breaking. Without thinking, he removed his coat, crossed the room, and knelt beside Jonah. "May I try?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly. Daniel guided him through the steps Ava had taught, slow and steady counting under his breath. When Jonah completed the turn, Daniel laughed a sound that startled everyone, even himself. Ava watched, eyes glistening. The billionaire who once spoke in numbers now moved in rhythm, clumsy yet earnest. For the first time, she saw him unarmored. When class ended, the kids cheered. Jonah hugged Daniel's leg before leaving. "You're not bad for a beginner," he said. Daniel smiled. "I had a good teacher." Ava stood by the door, arms folded. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered when the children were gone. "People will talk." "Let them," he said. "I'm tired of living for people who stopped listening years ago." She shook her head. "This isn't your world, Daniel. It wasn't yours either," he replied. "Stepping closer until you made it so." They stood inches apart, the space between them charged. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "Because I realize the world I built doesn't matter if I can't feel it. You reminded me what it's like to be human. I can't lose that again." Her breath caught. "You don't need me for that." "Maybe not," he said softly, "but I need you to remember how." She looked into his eyes, gray, weary, honest, and saw no lies there, only longing. Without a word, she turned off the lights, leaving the room, lit only by the glow from the windows. "Then dance," she said, "if you really mean it." He hesitated, then nodded. She played a soft instrumental track from her phone. The first notes echoed like a heartbeat. He reached for her hand. Their fingers touched, hesitant at first, then sure. They began to move, slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. The rhythm built their bodies, finding a language older than words. She guided him through the steps, his movements heavy but improving. "Don't count," she whispered. "Feel." He closed his eyes and followed her lead. The tension in his shoulders melted. She felt the warmth of his palm against hers, the weight of grief dissolving between them. The world outside disappeared, only the music remained. As they turned beneath the dim light, Daniel felt something crack open inside him. Memories flooded in Elise, laughing, the sound of rain on their first night in the apartment, the smell of her perfume on his coat. But now another image took its place. Ava standing before him, her hair loose, her eyes soft but steady. He realized this wasn't betrayal of the past, it was survival. The music faded, neither moved. Daniel's hand lingered on her waist, hers rested against his chest, feeling the heartbeat that had forgotten its rhythm. He exhaled shakily. "I haven't cried in 3 years," he whispered. "Then maybe it's time," she said. He pulled away, covering his face with both hands. The sob came suddenly raw, breaking the silence. Ava stepped forward and held him, no words, no judgment, just warmth. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the heat returned not from the vents, but from the fragile human warmth between them. Hours later, they sat on the floor near the mirrors' backs against the wall, exhausted but lighter. When Elise died, he said quietly, "I thought I had to become someone else to survive, but all I did was turn into a shadow." "Grief doesn't ask for transformation," Ava replied. "It just asks to be seen." He looked at her. "You always know what to say." "No," she smiled faintly. "I just know how to listen." He took her hand again, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, for what?" "For making me move again." She leaned her head back, closing her eyes. "You did that yourself." A pause, soft and full. Then she said, "Promise me one thing. Anything. Don't disappear again." He nodded. "I won't." But the world wasn't kind to promises made in fragile moments. Outside, unseen by either of them, a car idled near the curb. A woman inside raised a camera. The shutter clicked once, twice. Flash-off evidence captured. Melissa Grant lowered the lens, her expression unreadable. She whispered to herself, "So this is where he's been hiding." Then she drove away into the snow. Back inside, Daniel looked at Ava, unaware of the storm forming beyond those walls. "You said once that everyone can dance," he murmured. "Does that include people like me? Especially people like you," she said. They stood one last time facing the mirror. She placed his hand on her waist again, smiling gently. "Let's see if you remember." They moved slower now. No music this time, just the quiet rhythm of breath and heartbeat. In their reflection, they looked like two ordinary souls, learning to trust the world again. The city outside carried on, unaware that somewhere in Brooklyn, a billionaire and a waitress had found something extraordinary in the simplest act of all the courage to move. Morning headlines struck like lightning. Billionaire Daniel Whitmore, spotted in intimate moment with Foundation employee. The photograph filled every newsfeed, every gossip column. Daniel's hand on Ava's waist, her face turned toward him. The reflection of their dance caught perfectly in the studio mirror. The story wrote itself, scandal, power, forbidden romance. Melissa Grant's name sat under the byline. Within hours, Whitmore Innovations stock wavered. The Foundation's board called an emergency meeting, and Ava's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her inbox flooded with questions she didn't know how to answer. By noon, she stood in the Foundation hallway, surrounded by whispers. People she'd worked beside for months avoided her eyes. Marjorie, her supervisor, took her aside. "Ava, the board needs to suspend your internship pending review." Ava's stomach twisted. "Suspend for what? I haven't done anything wrong." "It's optics," Marjorie said gently. "There's pressure from the company. The media is circling." Ava's throat tightened. "So they believe it? They believe what they see." Marjorie said, "And what they see is a man with power and a woman with proximity." Across the city, Daniel faced his own battlefield. The boardroom buzzed with cold voices. "This jeopardizes our image," one executive said. "The press is framing it as misconduct. We have shareholders panicking," another added. Daniel listened, jaw clenched. "It was taken out of context," he said evenly. "Context doesn't sell," someone replied. "You need to make a public statement. Deny involvement, distance yourself." His assistant slid a prepared draft across the table. "Say it was an employee misunderstanding." Daniel stared at the paper, the words swimming before his eyes. Deny, distance, disown. He stood suddenly. "No." The room fell silent. "I won't lie," he said, voice low but certain. "This isn't a scandal. It's a photograph of two people dancing." "You don't get to decide what it is," the chairman snapped. "You're not the only one this affects." Daniel looked at the faces around him, men who'd praised his brilliance, women who'd quoted his vision, none of whom had ever understood him. Then maybe I built the wrong empire, he said, and walked out. Cameras flashed as he exited the building. Questions screamed from every direction. Mr. Kara Whitmore, who is Ava Thompson? Did she manipulate you? Were you having an affair? He said nothing. Silence was his only refuge, though it sounded a lot like guilt. That evening, Ava returned home to find her mailbox stuffed with letters. Some hateful, some sympathetic. Her roommate Jenna stood in the doorway, worry etched on her face. "You need to stay off social media," Jenna said. "It's brutal out there." Ava sank onto the couch. "I didn't do anything, Jen. We were teaching, that's all." Jenna sat beside her. "I know, but they don't care about truth. They care about the story." Ava rubbed her temples. "I should call him." "Don't," Jenna said quickly. "Let him fix it. He has the power to make this right." But when Ava finally gathered courage and dialed his number, the call went straight to voicemail. The next day she tried again, same result. She even called his assistant, who said softly, "Mr. Whitmore is in meetings." The unspoken message was clear: he wasn't going to talk. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his penthouse television, muted phone buzzing relentlessly. The board had forced him to make a choice: issue the statement or face removal as CEO. He reread the draft again and again. Every sentence tasted like betrayal. His reflection in the window stared back with quiet accusation. "You're protecting yourself," it whispered, just like before. He remembered Elise's funeral, the media crowding the church, the flashbulbs that turned grief into spectacle. He had sworn never to let the world use someone's pain again. And yet, here he was doing exactly that. By the end of the week, Ava was officially terminated from the foundation. The email was short, corporate, merciless. "Effective immediately. Your position has been discontinued." She closed her laptop slowly, feeling nothing and everything at once. Outside, snow began to fall heavy and relentless. She packed her few belongings into a box and walked out of the office, head high, ignoring the pitying looks. On the subway ride home, she stared at her reflection in the dark window, wondering how kindness could turn into condemnation so fast. In a board meeting across town, Daniel finally spoke. "If removing me restores your comfort, then do it," he said. "But I won't destroy someone innocent to keep your headlines clean." The chairman glared. "This isn't about comfort, it's about control." Daniel smiled thinly. "Exactly." He walked out again this time, knowing it might be permanent. Outside, the world hissed with falling snow and flashbulbs. He slipped into his car, shut the door, and whispered to the driver, "Just drive." The city blurred by. Every building looked like a reflection of what he'd built, grand, cold, untouchable. For the first time, he hated it all. He asked himself what Elise would think if she saw him now, choosing silence over truth, fear over love. The answer came softly, like her voice. "You already know Daniel." That night, Ava received a call from her landlord. "I'm sorry, Ava, but the news brought attention to the building. The owner wants to avoid media trouble. You'll need to find another place." She hung up without responding. She packed her clothes, her dance shoes, and the small notebook where she'd written her lessons. When she reached the bus station, she looked back at the skyline one last time. The lights looked cruel now. She whispered to herself, "It's time." Then she boarded a night bus to Vermont, where her aunt had a spare room, and no one cared about billionaires or scandals. Days turned to weeks. The city forgot her quickly, as it always does. But Daniel didn't. He followed the headlines as they died down the world, moving on to newer dramas. His company stabilized. The board reinstated him with conditions. To them, it was a victory. To him, it was an emptiness deeper than failure. One evening, he found himself outside the Velvet Note. The bar hadn't changed, the same dim lights, the same saxophone player, the same smell of whiskey and rain. He sat in the corner booth where they had first met. The waitress, a new one, approached. "Would you like to order, sir?" He smiled faintly. "No, I'm just listening." The band began to play the same song as that night. He could almost feel Ava's hand again, hear her whisper, "Would you like to dance?" He closed his eyes, whispering to no one yes. Across the miles in Vermont, Ava stood before a group of children at a small community center. She had volunteered to teach dance again, refusing payment. The floor was old, the heater broken, but the laughter was real. She taught them with the same gentleness, the same fire. When a little girl asked Miss Ava, "Are you married?" she smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart, I'm just dancing alone for now." That night, after class, she walked home through the snow. She looked up at the stars, sharp and endless, and wondered if Daniel ever looked at the same sky. In Manhattan, he did. He sat by his window, snow falling in streaks of white phone in hand. He had her number memorized, though it had been disconnected. He wanted to find her, but part of him believed she deserved peace away from him. Still, every night he dreamed of her voice saying, "Don't listen to fear. Listen to the drum." The press eventually moved on, but the world Daniel knew had changed forever. He turned down new projects, canceled interviews, withdrew from public life. His board called him unpredictable. He called it human. When asked if he regretted the photo, he said simply, "No." Some truths are worth the fallout. The quote circulated online, misunderstood, twisted, romanticized. But for him, it was confession, not rebellion. Months later, at a charity event he couldn't avoid, a journalist asked if he still believed in redemption. He looked into the camera, his voice steady. "I believe in grace," he said. "It often comes disguised as disaster." The clip went viral, shared with captions like, "The billionaire who danced. He didn't care. He was done performing for the world." The only stage that mattered now was empty somewhere far away, where a woman named Ava might still be teaching others how to move again. In the quiet hours of night, Daniel stood by the window of his penthouse, staring at the city that no longer belonged to him. The storm outside had calmed, but the one inside had only begun to change shape. It wasn't rage anymore. It was longing, sharp and honest. He whispered into the silence, "I'll find you." Then he turned off the lights and let the darkness rest around him like a vow. Vermont was quieter than Ava remembered. The air was sharper, the streets lined with bare trees, and every morning smelled faintly of pine and coffee. Her aunt's house stood at the edge of a small town near Lake Champlain, a place where no one asked about headlines or billionaires or broken promises. It was peace, but also exile. She found work at a local school, teaching movement classes to children. The pay was modest, but the simplicity steadied her. The kids didn't care about her past. They cared that she let them dance barefoot and clap offbeat without scolding. At night, she walked home along the frozen path by the lake, her breath forming small clouds, her thoughts drifting toward the man she had left behind. She tried to hate him, but hatred never came, only silence. It was a silence that stretched between them like a frozen river, both solid and fragile. In that silence, she began to rebuild. Daniel's silence, however, was louder. After Ava's departure, his life moved on paper, but not in truth. His company functioned, but he was a ghost in the boardroom. He spoke only when necessary, his words stripped of conviction. He had reduced his existence to numbers again, but they meant nothing. His penthouse remained immaculate, untouched, since the last day she was there. The sound of her voice still lingered somewhere between the walls. He had deleted her number, yet memorized it all the same. Every evening he would find himself at the piano fingers, hovering above keys, unable to play. He hadn't touched music since Elise's death, until Ava came along and made him remember. Now the keys frightened him. They reminded him of everything he'd lost twice. He didn't know if he deserved forgiveness, or if he even wanted it. What he wanted, though, he wouldn't admit. It was her. Not the idea of her, not the comfort she gave, but the reality, her laugh, her stubbornness, her warmth. The winter deepened. The city pressed on without him. The press had moved on, but Melissa Grant hadn't. She reached out through email, asking for an interview to set the record straight. He ignored it. Some nights he thought about confronting her, but revenge felt hollow. Ava wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, he turned his focus back to the foundation, restoring funding for every art program she'd created, renaming the outreach division after her curriculum the Thompson Initiative. He didn't make an announcement or attend the ceremony. He just signed the papers and walked away. It wasn't enough, but it was something. In Vermont, Ava received the news by accident. An email from a former coworker congratulated her. She read it twice, stunned. The Thompson Initiative. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her laptop. She felt gratitude, but also sadness. He was still trying to fix things with money, still trying to build redemption out of paper. But she couldn't deny what the gesture meant. It wasn't ego, it was apology. That night she went to the lake, the surface frozen over like glass. She stood in the moonlight, whispering to herself, "You don't need to find me, Daniel. I already forgave you." Back in Manhattan, Daniel's assistant informed him the sale of his remaining shares was finalized. "Are you sure about this?" the man asked. Daniel nodded, completely. He had built an empire out of grief, and now he was dismantling it piece by piece. Money could no longer shield him from emptiness. He wanted to feel the weight of the world again, even if it hurt. Days passed without structure. He began volunteering anonymously at the community center that Ava had once managed. The children didn't recognize him. To them, he was just Mr. Dan, the quiet man who helped fix the heater and brought snacks. He found comfort in the smallness of those days, the smell of paint, the laughter, the occasional chaos. He had become invisible, and for once, invisibility felt like peace. One evening, a small girl approached him while he was sweeping. "You look sad," she said. "I'm not sad," he lied. "I'm thinking." "About what? About someone I lost." The girl tilted her head. "Then you should dance. That's what Miss Ava says when people feel heavy." He froze, broom still in hand. "You knew her." "She used to teach here before Christmas," the girl said. "She said dancing helps the heart remember." The words struck deep, simple and profound. He smiled faintly, whispering, "She's right." After that night, Daniel began to dance again, alone in the empty room after the children left. His movements were awkward, stiff, but honest. Each step was a confession. He didn't dance to music, he danced to silence. The rhythm of his breath, the echo of her laughter. Slowly his body began to remember what his mind tried to forget. Meanwhile, Ava's class in Vermont was growing. The local paper wrote a small feature about the city girl teaching grace to small-town kids. Parents thanked her, the children adored her. But something inside her remained restless. She would catch glimpses of couples on the street, hands intertwined, laughter shared, and feel a sting of loneliness she pretended not to notice. One evening, her aunt asked gently, "You're doing good work, sweetheart, but are you happy?" Ava smiled politely. "Happiness isn't the goal, Aunt May. Peace is." But later that night, lying in bed, she realized peace without connection was just another kind of loneliness. In early March, Daniel's lawyer informed him that his resignation from the company was official. "You're free, sir," the lawyer said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I've been free before. It didn't feel like this." He spent that evening walking through Brooklyn, tracing every street that had once led him to her. He stopped outside the Velvet Note. The same jazz song played inside, muffled through the door. He stepped in. The bartender, a new face, greeted him. "Evening, what'll it be?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing, I'm just listening." He sat in the same seat, eyes closed, remembering her voice, her question. "Would you like to dance?" The melody wrapped around him like a promise. He whispered under his breath, "Yes, Ava, always yes." Far away at the same moment, Ava was teaching her students a new choreography for the spring recital. She instructed them to imagine dancing with someone they missed. Not with sadness, she said, but with gratitude. As she demonstrated the steps, her body moved differently, freer, lighter, as if her heart had unclenched. The children clapped, and she laughed, realizing she was smiling for the first time in weeks. After class, she stayed behind, alone, turning on the same song that had played the night she met him. Her reflection in the mirror looked older, wiser, but not broken. She whispered, "Maybe this is what healing looks like." Back in New York, Daniel began planning something new. A journey not for business, but for closure. He told his assistant, "Find out where the Franklin Avenue team relocated. I want to visit every site we've funded." It wasn't about control anymore. It was about connection. The assistant hesitated. "That'll take you across several states, sir." "Good," Daniel said. "Maybe I'll find what I lost on the way." The last snow of the season fell that night, covering the city like forgiveness. For the first time in years, Daniel slept without dreams. And hundreds of miles away, Ava stood by the frozen lake, watching the first crack form in the ice. As spring whispered its return, she didn't know that somewhere in the city, he was already packing. A small bag leaving behind the tower of glass for the open road. They were both moving slowly, quietly, toward the same. The first signs of spring arrived in Vermont quietly. The snow melting into soft streams along the roadsides. The air carrying the faint smell of thawed earth and pine. Ava walked to the community hall that morning, her steps light despite the chill that lingered. The children were rehearsing for the spring festival, an event the town took seriously. Handmade banners, borrowed speakers, and a stage built from old wooden planks. To Ava, it wasn't just a recital. It was proof that hope could bloom even in small places. She spent the morning adjusting costumes, taping the floor, and laughing with her students. When the sun began to dip, casting gold over the lake, she stood outside the hall, looking at the reflection of light on the water. For the first time in months, she felt content. Not happy, not sad, just still. She whispered, "Maybe this is enough." She didn't know that several states away, Daniel was driving north. His car packed lightly, a small duffel on the passenger seat. The road stretching endless ahead. He had no destination, only the quiet certainty that he needed to see her again. He followed the map to every project the foundation had funded, visiting centers, schools, and small-town programs. Each time he saw a child dance, he thought of her. Every smile reminded him of what she had taught him, that kindness could change the course of a life. By the time he reached Vermont, the trees were green again. He stopped at a gas station near the edge of town and asked the clerk, "Is there a community dance event happening soon?" The man smiled. "You must mean the spring festival. Happens tomorrow by the lake. Everyone goes." Daniel nodded, feeling his pulse quicken. That night he booked a room at a small inn overlooking the water. The next morning he put on a simple dark suit. No tie, no watch. Nothing that screamed wealth. He wanted to arrive not as the billionaire from the papers, but as the man who had once said yes to a dance. The festival began just before sunset. The air was full of laughter, the smell of popcorn and fresh bread, the hum of live music. Children ran between stalls, their faces painted with flowers. Ava stood backstage calming the younger dancers. She wore a pale blue dress, simple but graceful, her hair tied back loosely. When the announcer introduced her class, applause filled the space. She stepped onto the small wooden stage with her students guiding them through their opening sequence. The song was soft at first, piano notes, shimmering through the air like memory. The children moved beautifully, their faces glowing with concentration. When the music ended, the crowd erupted in cheers. Ava bowed with her students, pride swelling in her chest. And then, as the applause faded, she heard a voice from the crowd. "Miss Ava," someone whispered behind the curtain. She turned and froze. Daniel stood there holding something in his hands, a worn pair of dance shoes, scuffed and familiar. "I believe," he said softly, "I owe you a dance." The world seemed to stop. The crowd fell silent, sensing something they didn't understand. Ava's heart pounded. "Daniel," she breathed, "what are you doing here? Finding what I should never have lost." His voice trembled, not with fear but with emotion, too full to contain. She took a step back, overwhelmed. "You shouldn't be here. People let them watch," he said. "They've seen everything else. Let them see this too." The audience waited, whispering the band, uncertain. Then Daniel handed her the shoes. "You taught me that dancing isn't about being seen," he said. "It's about being alive, and I haven't felt alive since you left." Ava's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she slipped off her flats and stepped into the old shoes. The band began to play again, slowly, gently, the same melody that had filled the velvet note months ago. Daniel extended his hand. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They began to move hesitant at first, then smoother with each beat. The crowd watched hushed, as if witnessing something sacred. Their bodies swayed in rhythm, no choreography, no performance, just feeling. The light from the lake glimmered across the stage, making them appear almost ethereal. Daniel's hand pressed lightly against her back, steadying her when her breath caught. "I thought I lost everything," he murmured, "but I was just afraid to start again." And now she asked, "Now I'm not afraid?" She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "You came all this way for a dance for you," he said. The crowd, unaware of the full story, began to cheer softly as the music swelled. Some filmed, others smiled, but most simply watched, feeling the pull of something real. When the final note ended, Daniel and Ava stood in silence, hands still clasped, eyes locked. A child from Ava's class ran forward, handing her a flower crown. She placed it on her head, laughing through tears. The applause erupted again, louder this time. In the back, Melissa Grant stood among the onlookers, camera in hand. She had followed the story thinking to capture another scandal, but as she watched them dance, her hand fell away from the shutter. For once, she couldn't bring herself to take the shot. She lowered the camera and smiled faintly, whispering, "Let them have this." The music faded. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "You once said everyone can dance. I think I finally understand what that means." Ava smiled through tears. "It means even broken hearts have rhythm." He took her hand again and kissed it softly, not as an apology, but as a promise. The festival continued, but to them time had stopped. Later, after the crowd dispersed and the lanterns flickered low, Ava found Daniel sitting on a bench near the lake. The moonlight shimmered on the water like silver threads. She sat beside him. "You shouldn't have risked your reputation for this," she said quietly. He turned to her. "A reputation built on loneliness isn't worth keeping." "And your company sold," he said simply. "I didn't need it anymore. I needed something real." She exhaled, stunned. "You really let it go?" "All of it, except this." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a newspaper clipping. It was the first article about her Vermont class, the one that called her the city girl teaching grace. "I've been carrying this," he said, "not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I found." Ava's eyes softened. "You didn't have to do all that, maybe not, but I wanted to earn the right to ask you something." He stood extending his hand again. "One last dance." She laughed softly. "You just danced in front of the whole town. Then this one's just for us." She took his hand. They danced barefoot on the damp grass, the music replaced by the rhythm of crickets and distant waves. No spotlight, no cameras, just two souls who had found their way back. Through silence and pain, he whispered, "You taught me love isn't something you build. It's something you remember." She rested her head against his chest. "And I remember," she said quietly. The night grew colder, but they didn't notice. They stayed that way until the first light of dawn brushed the horizon. When he finally spoke again, his voice was gentle. "Ava, would you stay in New York with me, or wherever you want to go? We'll build something that isn't about power, something that dances." She looked up at him, eyes glimmering. "I don't belong in your world, Daniel." "Then I'll come to yours," he said simply. "I just want to be where you are." She smiled the kind of smile that carried both sadness and hope. "You're impossible. So are you," he said, laughing softly. The laughter turned into quiet stillness, and then just once he kissed her slow and certain. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was real, tender, unfinished, like life itself. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "You found me." "No," he said. "You were never lost." The lanterns behind them flickered out one by one, leaving only the lake's reflection of the morning light. It wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, quiet and sure, like the first step of a dance long overdue. The next morning the festival grounds were quiet, littered with ribbons, paper cups, and the fading scent of popcorn. The lake shimmered beneath the early sun, calm and endless. Ava stood barefoot at the edge of the water, her dress fluttering in the breeze, her reflection rippling beside Daniel's as he approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from a nearby stall. "You didn't sleep," he said softly, handing her one. She smiled faintly. "Neither did you." They sat on a weathered bench overlooking the lake. Silence stretched between them, but it was a comfortable one now, filled not with what was unsaid, but with everything understood. "When I left New York," Ava began, I told myself I'd never see you again, that some worlds don't belong together. And now he asked. She took a sip of coffee. Now I think some worlds collide for a reason. He watched her sunlight catching the strands of her hair, the soft weariness around her eyes. You changed me, Ava, he said, not in the way people talk about change like a miracle, but in the quiet way you taught me to breathe again. She looked at him, a hint of disbelief softening into affection. I didn't do anything, she whispered. You did everything. You looked at me like I was still human. His voice caught slightly. After Elise died, I stopped seeing people. Everyone became a transaction, a blur of need and noise. You reminded me that love isn't control, it's surrender. She reached out, touching his hand gently. Then maybe we both needed each other. Maybe, he said, but I think I needed you more. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of children laughing in the distance, echoes from the previous night. He turned toward her, eyes steady. I have something for you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Ava frowned. Daniel, you didn't have to. It's not what you think. He opened it slowly. Inside wasn't a diamond ring or anything extravagant, but a thin silver bracelet engraved with delicate letters, Dance Again. Her breath caught. It's beautiful. It's the phrase you gave me, he said. You told me once that everyone can dance, even when they've forgotten how. That night, I was the one who forgot. She traced the letters, with her fingertip eyes glistening. You remembered, she whispered. Every step he said. Every breath. He hesitated, then smiled slightly. I guess this is where I'm supposed to ask a question. She looked at him, heart thudding. Daniel, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I'm asking you to choose this. Us, whatever this becomes. He paused, his tone soft but firm. No more worlds apart, no more hiding, just two people trying again. She didn't answer immediately. The sound of waves brushed against the dock gulls calling somewhere overhead. Then slowly she nodded. I choose this, she said, even if it scares me. His shoulders eased, a quiet laugh escaping. It scares me too. They sat for a moment, watching the sun climb higher, the warmth spreading across their faces. He turned to her again. You know I started a new project, he said, a real one. The kind Elise dreamed about before she died. What kind of project? It's called the Ava Project, he said, smiling. A partnership between the foundation and community schools. Free dance and art programs for kids who can't afford them. She blinked, stunned. Daniel, why would you name it after me? Because you're the reason it exists, he said simply. You taught me that art isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. Elise believed that too. I think she would have wanted me to continue with someone who understands. Ava swallowed, tears welling. You didn't have to do that for me. I didn't, he said. I did it because you saved me first. She laughed softly through tears. You make it sound heroic. It is, he said. Loving in a world that rewards apathy, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen. They sat in silence for a while. The sky turned brighter, the lake rippling with golden light. A group of children ran past waving at Ava. Miss Ava, are you coming to class later? One shouted. She waved back, smiling. Daniel watched her, a quiet awe in his expression. You belong here, he said. With them, with this. She turned to him. And where do you belong? He looked at the horizon. Wherever you are. You can't just leave everything behind, she said. I already did, he replied. But maybe it's not about leaving. Maybe it's about coming home. The words lingered soft and certain. She rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. "You're impossible," she murmured. "And persistent," he added. "Don't forget persistent." She laughed quietly. "You think this will work? A billionaire and a dance teacher." "No," he said, "but I think love will." Later that afternoon, they walked back toward the festival grounds. Now empty except for a few volunteers taking down banners. Near the stage, a small group of local reporters gathered, asking for a comment about the mysterious billionaire spotted at the event. Daniel smiled politely. "No statements," he said, "just gratitude." One of them asked, "Is it true you're stepping away from the business world permanently?" He nodded. "It's true. I'm learning to build something else." "What's that?" another asked. He looked at Ava, then back at them. "A life worth dancing in." The story spread, but unlike before, the tone was different. Headlines read, "Whitmore's Return." From CEO to humanitarian, public perception shifted not because of wealth or power, but because of sincerity. Melissa Grant published a follow-up piece titled "The Dance That Changed a Billionaire," ending it with "Sometimes grace doesn't come from the powerful. It comes from those who remind them how to move." The article went viral for its kindness. Daniel sent her a thank you note, no bitterness attached. She never replied, but she smiled when she read it. That evening, Ava and Daniel sat outside her aunt's porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. Fireflies flickered in the distance, their glow faint and patient. "So what now?" Ava asked. "Now Daniel said we start slow. I'll stay here for a while, help with the program. Maybe rent a place nearby. Maybe fix that broken heater at your studio. You know how to fix heaters, I'll learn," he said, grinning. She laughed, resting her head against him. "You're really not leaving, not unless you ask me to." "Then I guess you're staying," she whispered. The night deepened and the stars came out, scattered and bright. She looked up at them, remembering how far they'd both come. "Do you ever think about how strange it all was?" she asked. "A dance, a photograph, a scandal. Every day," he said. "And I'd live it all again if it led me here." She looked at him, eyes shimmering with quiet certainty. "Then maybe we're both finally where we belong." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we're just beginning." He reached into his pocket again, pulling out something small, a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" she asked. "My resignation letter," he said. "I never sent it." He handed it to her. "You can keep it. Proof that walking away from power was the easiest decision I ever made." She smiled, folding it carefully. "Then I'll keep it as a reminder that even the strongest need to start over." He looked at her, voice barely above a whisper. "So do you forgive me? I forgave you long before you asked," she said. The wind rustled the trees, soft and rhythmic, like a quiet song only they could hear. He leaned closer, brushing his lips against her forehead. "Thank you for teaching me how to dance again." "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing up when I stopped believing anyone would." The lake reflected, the starlight shimmering with the promise of tomorrow. They stayed there until the world grew still. Two silhouettes framed against the glow of rebirth. A year later, New York looked different to Ava. The city that had once felt too fast, too bright, too unforgiving, now glowed with a warmth she hadn't noticed before. Maybe it wasn't the city that changed, maybe it was her. The grand opening of the Light Studio was that morning a project she and Daniel had spent months building from the ground up. It wasn't just a dance studio, it was a sanctuary. A place for children who couldn't afford, lessons for adults who had forgotten how to feel joy, for anyone who needed to move again. The brick building sat in a quiet corner of Brooklyn's sunlight, spilling through the wide windows, music echoing faintly from inside. A small sign above the door read simply, "The Light Studio." Beneath it, in smaller letters, the quote they had chosen together. It all started with a whisper. Inside, the air smelled of new paint and possibility. Ava moved between the rooms, adjusting chairs, fixing ribbons, checking on the kids who would perform at the opening. Her hands trembled slightly from excitement, not nerves. "Miss Ava, does this look okay?" a little girl asked, twirling in her white dress. "It looks perfect," Ava said, kneeling to tie the ribbon on her shoe. "Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about feeling the music." The girl grinned. "Like you always say." Ava smiled. She stood and glanced toward the door where Daniel was talking to a group of parents. He looked different now, less like a CEO, more like a man who belonged to the world again. His hair was slightly longer, his face relaxed, his laughter unguarded. He caught her gaze from across the room and smiled in that quiet way that still made her heart flutter. She walked over. "How's it going, Mr. Whitmore?" she teased. "It's Daniel," he said, feigning seriousness. "I retired from titles. You'll always sound like one," she said. He laughed. "And you'll always sound like someone who underestimates herself." They stood together, watching the children warm up. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Ava asked. "Every day," he said. "And I still don't fully understand it." "Maybe we don't have to," she said softly. "Maybe it's enough that we did." As guests began to arrive, the music grew louder. The opening ceremony was simple. No press releases, no spotlights, no VIPs, just people who believed in what the studio stood for. The mayor gave a brief speech about art bridging communities, but it was Ava's short address that everyone remembered. Standing on the small stage microphone, trembling slightly in her hand, she looked out at the faces before her. This place, she began, was built on a second chance, not just for me or for Daniel, but for everyone who's ever been told that they don't belong. The Light Studio isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about remembering that movement is a language of hope. Her voice steadied her words, flowing from a place deep within. "When I was at my lowest, someone once told me that love isn't something you build, it's something you remember." I think that's true for art, too. You don't create it to be seen. You create it to feel alive. There was silence then, applause slow at first, then thunderous. Daniel watched from the corner, his eyes glistening with quiet pride. When she stepped off the stage, he met her halfway and squeezed her hand. "You were brilliant," he whispered. "I just told the truth," she said. "That's why it was brilliant," he replied. The performance began soon after. The children danced to a simple piano melody, joyful, imperfect, full of laughter. Among them was Jonah, the boy from Ava's first class, now walking without braces, his steps strong and sure. The audience rose to their feet when he finished the applause, shaking the walls. Ava wiped her eyes, and Daniel slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You gave them this," he said. "No," she corrected softly. "We did." After the event, as the sun set and the last guests trickled out, Ava and Daniel stood alone in the main hall. The floor was covered with glitter and confetti, the faint echo of music still in the air. So Ava said, kicking at a stray ribbon, "What now?" "Now," he said, smiling, "we dance." She laughed, again always. He reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward the center of the room. There was no music, only the soft hum of the city outside. But somehow it was enough. They moved slowly, the kind of dance that wasn't for show, but for survival, the kind that said, "We're still here." "You ever think about that night at the Velvet Note?" he asked quietly. "Every time I close my eyes," she said, "you looked like someone who didn't want to be seen." "And you looked like someone who refused not to see me," he replied. She smiled, leaning her head against his chest. "I think that was the beginning." "No," he said. "That was the reminder." They swayed in silence, the world shrinking to the rhythm of their breath. Months later, the light studio became more than they ever dreamed. Branches opened in other neighborhoods. Volunteers came from across the state. Children found confidence, adults found solace. One afternoon, a journalist from The New Yorker wrote a feature titled "The Dance That Healed a City," describing how two people's redemption created a ripple of kindness across communities. Ava and Daniel didn't read the piece until days later, sitting on the studio's rooftop garden sunlight, soft on their faces. She laughed at the headline. "Healed a city, that's dramatic. They're writers," he said, smiling. "We just gave them something real." Their relationship didn't turn into a fairy tale, it became something better. They argued sometimes about scheduling, about decisions, about who forgot to lock the studio door. But even in disagreement, there was tenderness. When she got overwhelmed, he'd quietly brew tea and sit beside her until the storm passed. When he drifted into his old habits of control, she'd take his hand and say, "Breathe. You're not saving anyone. You're just dancing." It became their mantra. One evening, a year after the studio's opening, Daniel asked her to walk with him through Brooklyn Bridge Park. The city lights shimmered on the river, the skyline glittering like a memory of all they'd survived. "You're quiet," Ava said. "That's new." "I'm thinking," he said. "About what? About time. About how everything I chased turned out to be noise, and the only thing that mattered was this." He gestured toward the river, toward her, the stillness between moments. She smiled. "You've gotten poetic. You're a bad influence," he teased. Then after a pause, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Daniel," she whispered, startled. "Before you panic," he said, smiling nervously, "it's not what you think." He opened it. Inside lay not a diamond ring, but two thin silver pendants, shaped like intertwined notes engraved with the words, "Begin again." "It's for both of us," he said, "because I don't ever want to forget what we built." Her eyes filled with tears. "You really are impossible," she whispered. "Completely," he said. She laughed, wiping her cheeks. "So what does this mean?" "It means we don't have to promise forever," he said. "Just today. And then tomorrow we promise again." She nodded, sliding the pendant around her neck. "I can do that." They stood by the river until the wind grew cold. Their hands clasped their reflections, swaying on the water. The world around them buzzed with life cars' laughter, distant horns, but none of it mattered. For once, the city and their hearts moved to the same rhythm. Back at the Light Studio, a year-end showcase took place the following week. Children from across the boroughs gathered, their families filling the hall. Ava opened the show with a speech that ended in a single, unforgettable sentence. "Love like dance is not about perfection, it's about persistence." Daniel filmed from the back, his eyes never leaving her. When the final performance ended, he joined her on stage, wrapping an arm around her as the audience clapped. Someone from the front row shouted, "Speech." Daniel chuckled and took the microphone. "I don't have much to say," he began. "Just that every good thing in my life started because someone asked me to dance." The crowd laughed and cheered, some wiping their eyes. He looked at Ava, his voice softening. "And she never stopped teaching me how." The applause echoed long after they left the stage. Later that night, when the studio was empty, they stood in front of a framed photograph hanging on the wall, a black and white still from the security camera at the Velvet Note the night everything began. In it, they were caught mid-dance, her hand on his shoulder, his eyes lowered toward her. Below it, a small plaque read, "It all started with a whisper." Ava traced the frame with her fingers. "You kept this. I asked the owner for it," he said. "He thought I was insane." "He wasn't wrong," she said, smiling. They stood there for a long time, watching the photo as if it might move. Then Daniel whispered, "You know what I think? What that someday when we're old, this will still be my favorite story." "Mine too," she said. He turned off the lights and they walked out together, the city glowing through the glass windows. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft, slow, and luminous. It blanketed the street, turning the noise of the city into a kind of hush. They stopped under a lamppost, the light haloing around them. Ava looked up at the falling snow and whispered, "It's beautiful." Daniel smiled. It always was. They stood there hand in hand, the world quiet around them. "You know," she said, "sometimes I still can't believe it, all of this. That one dance could change everything." It didn't change everything, he said gently. It revealed what was already waiting. She looked at him, eyes bright. "And what was that love?" he said. "Just love." The camera of imagination would pull back then, past the lamppost, past the glowing windows of the light studio, past the city that pulsed with 1,000 untold stories. And somewhere within the hum of that great breathing city, their laughter lingered, two souls who had stumbled, fallen, and learned to rise again through rhythm and grace. As the snow continued to fall, Ava whispered the words that had started it all, barely audible but full of memory. "Would you like to dance?" Daniel smiled, tightening his hand around hers. "Always," he said, "always. Before you leave, take a breath and let this story settle. Somewhere inside it, maybe you saw yourself in Ava's quiet courage, or in Daniel's search for meaning beyond success. Maybe you've felt that same kind of loneliness before, the kind that hides behind achievement, or the kind that keeps you up at night, wondering if anyone truly sees you. If this story touched something in you, don't let it fade when the video ends, because this channel, these stories, they exist for one reason: to remind you that love, kindness, and redemption are not fiction. They are waiting in the small corners of everyday life. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected connection, one question whispered softly, "Would you like to dance?" So tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Are you in Los Angeles, New York, London, or maybe a small town? Somewhere quiet like Ava's Vermont, I'd love to know. And tell me, have you ever met someone by chance who changed everything for you? It could be a stranger who smiled at you when you needed it most, a friend who stayed when others left, a teacher, a neighbor, a moment that felt ordinary till later you realized it wasn't. Share your story below, because someone else might need to hear it. If you felt something while listening, if a part of your heart stirred, the way Daniel's did when he heard that song again, take a second to like this video. It helps this story reach others who might be scrolling through the noise, searching for a reason to believe that good things still happen. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we share stories like this. Cinematic, emotional, real. Stories about love that heals, about second chances that find us when we least expect it. Maybe next week's story will remind you of yourself or of someone you once loved. Maybe it'll give you hope to forgive to start again, or to whisper your own version of would you like to dance to someone new. This community, Emma's Stories, isn't just about listening. It's about feeling, about remembering that even when the world feels disconnected, stories can pull us back together. So if you're still here, I want to thank you. You didn't just watch, you stayed, you felt, and you remembered what matters. That's rare. And if you're new here, welcome to a space where empathy still matters more than algorithms. Where every like, every comment, every share isn't just engagement, it's connection. It's proof that there are still people who believe in grace and love, in the simple act of seeing one another fully. And if you want to do something beautiful right now, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that healing takes time, but it's real. Send it to a friend going through heartbreak, to someone who thinks they've missed their chance. Tell them that sometimes the right story arrives exactly when you stop looking for it. Because that's what Ava and Daniel taught us. Redemption doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it walks quietly into your life, asks for a dance and stays. Before you go, close your eyes for a second. Think of one person you wish peace for. Someone who's been struggling. Whisper a silent prayer for them. That's how we keep the light moving forward, one act of empathy at a time. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, be kind, be brave, and never stop believing in the quiet kind of love that changes everything.